It has, by any estimation, been an extraordinary last 24 hours in Russia, watched with bated breath around the world. It seemed at one point that the Putin regime stood on the brink, with a column of military vehicles heading to Moscow. The leader of the rebels, Yevgeny Prigozhin of the mercenary group Wagner, has now done a deal to leave for Belarus. The rebellion began early yesterday morning in Rostov-on-Don, when forces of the Wagner Group occupied the headquarters for Russia's military operations in Ukraine. They then seized control of military facilities in Voronezh, about 500 kilometres south of Moscow. A mercenary convoy then advanced north of Voronezh along the M4 motorway towards Moscow. Russian forces then erected defensive positions and blockaded main roads and bridges along the route before the order was given for the mercenaries to stand down. Well, let's get the very latest now from our Moscow correspondent, Diana Magnay, who is live in the Russian capital. Good morning, Diana. What is the mood in Moscow and what is the military situation as you understand it?
Well, I mean, it's a sunny morning in Moscow, and I think people yesterday were watching events with a degree of confusion, and I think in Moscow especially, now they have a day off tomorrow, so they're probably just enjoying this peaceful resolution. And I think, though, there will be a lot of people who are questioning what on earth actually happened. And given the shadow it sort of casts over Putin's authority, over his credibility, bear in mind the fact that early yesterday morning he went on television and made a big speech talking about how this was treasonous, a stab in the heart of the Russian people, essentially, and only a few hours later backtracked and let Prigozhin slink off to Belarus, where he is either en route or already in situ. It doesn't look very good for Vladimir Putin. I think there are a lot of questions being asked as to why on earth, Prigozhin, who is entirely a man of the Kremlin's own making. All of his projects over the last 10 years have been for serving the Kremlin's purposes. Why Putin has constructed a system of the power vertical where he can't get Shoigu, Gerasimov and Prigozhin sitting around a table with the commander-in-chief and hash out the problems all in one room together. Why it has to come to this kind of a breaking point is entirely Putin's fault, because he just likes to keep these different factions sort of at arm's length. Prigozhin doesn't really have a direct line to Vladimir Putin. That's why he likes to shout and rave on social media all the time. So, this was a very strange situation. But frankly, given the amount of noise that Prigozhin has been making over the past 3 or 4 months, one would have been foolish to think that it couldn't have got this far. But I think the fact that there are so many question marks over how quickly it's does beg a lot of questions. Now, if Prigozhin is given power and authority to do what he wants in Belarus, that is actually going to be extremely uncomfortable for the West, for Ukraine, for the Belarusian people. Lukashenko is rumoured to be fairly ill. He's been in Moscow quite a lot recently. I'm sure that the Kremlin is looking around for a substitute for him, or for someone who can exert power in Belarus. And if Prigozhin is still somebody who does heed the words of Vladimir Putin, then he would be placed there. We understand from Prigozhin that he has been offered governorships here in Russia before and has refused them. This would be quite a good substitute. Now, if that was part of the plan, then why did Putin come out and make this speech and end up looking so bad yesterday? I don't have the answers to this kind of thing. But the outcome, if Prigozhin ends up being a powerful man for Russia in Belarus against Ukraine, against the West, well, that suits Putin's purposes. But we don't know essentially what happened. We don't know the state of the military. Perhaps Prigozhin just recognised after he made his announcement and after that column came up towards Moscow that he simply didn't have the kind of backing within the military or within the security services that he might have hoped for, and that people weren't turning to him. So, it's really difficult to know. But I think, yeah.
Sorry, Diana, that's absolutely fascinating. So is it your estimation that Prigozhin actually, rather than sort of riding off into the sunset, is actually going to be a factor, or could actually now be a factor in the Ukraine war?
Well, I mean, he has been a considerable factor in the Ukraine war, hasn't he, because of his Wagner mercenaries. If he's positioned in Belarus, if Wagner takes more of a role in Belarus, if he's given power in Belarus, which is essentially up to Vladimir Putin rather than Alexander Lukashenko, then Belarus comes even more under the remit of Putin. But it just depends if he's allowed to take on that kind of power in Belarus or not. And then if you have Wagner mercenaries sitting in Belarus, there are already lots of Russian military bases there. That, in effect, gives more of a pincer movement around Ukraine. So I'm speculating here, but we'll have to see how much authority he's allowed to wield, or if he's just sort of essentially relegated there and sits in exile, as is the way it's being cast in some circles now. But if he is still Putin's man, he could be useful for him there.
Diana, thank you. We'll keep looking out for your fascinating analysis on this as the days go by. Thank you very much.